I'll preface this by saying that I'm a big believer in the paranormal. I used to find it laughable, but wound up living in a violently haunted house for more than a decade, and that opened up my mind a fair bit. That being said, I still generally assume that most creepy encounters, including my own, are misidentification unless something suggests otherwise. But anyway, about 2 years ago, I got saddled in with taking care of a puppy. He was only about 6 weeks old at the time, so he required a crap load of attention and care. The most annoying of which was that he had to be taken outside to pee every 2 hours, or so, even often, especially in the middle of the night, or else you had a mess on your hands. Now, stumbling outside half awake at 3 a.m. in the freezing cold is disorienting at the best of times, but the trailer I've been renting in rural North Carolina, for the record, has a bit of a disturbing history that makes every little sound or shadow feel a little more sinister than it is. It was one of these nights that my little buddy woke me up squalling to pee, and I stumbled down the steps to let him do his business. He immediately started crying to go back inside, his bladder still full, and I had to chase him up the steps a couple of times, getting increasingly irritated the whole time. After about the fourth time I placed him in the grass, he couldn't hold it anymore, and I looked around to give him some privacy. That's when I saw something. It was peering over my neighbor's hedge at us, standing upright and seemingly about to crawl over until it was spotted. I didn't have my glasses on, so I can't really speak to the specific details, but whatever it was ridiculously white, rail thin, obviously naked, and had unnervingly long arms. The hedge is around 6 foot, and it could just see over, so I'd estimate it was around the same height. When I looked at it, it stood stock still in the darkness, but when I turned my flashlight on it, dropped back on the neighbor's side and scurried on all fours around the side of our house and out of sight. My blood ran cold, and I slept in the living room that night because my bedroom was on the same side of the house that I saw the thing, and it had a large unobstructed window that I just didn't feel like sitting in front of for a few days. I mentioned it to some other people in the house, and they laughed it off as me imagining things, seeing the neighbor's cat, or even her meth-head daughter streaking. But it just didn't come up again for a good long while. I figured maybe it was just my imagination running wild. A few months ago I got married, and now we have 3 dogs that have to be taken out before we can go to sleep. They're 3 goofy, high-energy, extremely protective pit bulls that always seem super excited. Off and on, I had to spend the night at my sister's house to put my nieces on the bus so she could go into work early. So my wife had to take the dogs out before going to sleep by herself. Several times she mentioned the dogs whining and wanting to go in without using the bathroom, hearing something fairly large crawling around in the woods, seeing weird eye shine in the brush that runs off when her lights hit it, and hearing strange sound she could only describe as chittering. I was trying to find a sound that matched what she was talking about to try and set her mind at ease when some variation on the phrase chittering in the woods led to a story on flesh gates. I rolled my eyes at the typical creepypasta BS, but the obviously fake picture included made my skin crawl and my heart pound because it was exactly the way I remember that night. Literally hadn't thought of it in 2 years, but hearing so many people describe the exact same thing recently makes me think that maybe I shouldn't have dismissed it so easily. No idea what actually happened. Literally nobody does, but about 6 months before I started renting the place, one of the tenants disappeared from his bed in the middle of the night and was found torn to shreds about 200 yards away in the thickest part of the woods, lying in a small creek about 2 months later. He'd been ranting about demonic possession and that they were coming for him for months prior, and although he was obviously partially eaten, they couldn't figure out what did it. This sounds a little over the top, but it's assumed he was an undiagnosed schizophrenic, that wandered off drunk. Coyotes are everywhere around here, as are black bear, and although they aren't supposed to be cougar in the area, we aren't too far from the mountains, and a fair handful of neighbors say they think they've heard one prowling. John pulled the short straw. We all watched with icy breath as he let out a resigned groan and slumped back against the ship's railing. "I'm sorry," Baker said. "Just get it over with." The watching crows fled from their perch atop the mast when an explosion erupted over the silence of the water. They'd be back, though. After all, they were hungry, too. My nostrils were singed with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Neither I nor Baker spoke a word. He just kept holding his flintlock in a shaking hand, the barrel still steaming black smoke. I signed my chest with a crucifix and muttered my prayers. Bitter waves beat against the side of the ship, rocking us back and forth, steering us towards some uncontrollable destination. I know not where the ocean's path intended to take us, but it was a slim hope that there would be anyone left alive to see the current's end. "It's okay, Baker," I said through a strained voice. The act of speaking had become an agonizing test of endurance. Every word pulled and ripped at the sore flesh of my throat. He knew the stakes. He agreed to it. Empty words for empty men. How many times had this happened? How many times have our numbers dwindled one by one? Now there were only two. As of late, I'd often pondered what we'd done to so anger God. What could any man do to deserve such a slow, cold fate? I asked it every time I pulled the corpses below deck, where the maggots reveled and the rats festered. The dead men sometimes looked at me with smiles or horrified expressions of fear and anguish. At times, even their mouths moved, but no words ever escaped. Eyes bored deep into their dead skulls, so dull and glossy, but so full of damnation and accusation. I wondered what John's face would do when it joined the rest of their lot. There would be time for the rambling and philosophy of dying men later. Right then, my stomach screamed and howled. Pain stabs of hunger reaped destruction on my insides. Baker and I moved in with one mind and began the unholy atrocity of defiling the dead. The cold flesh fought the sharpness of our steel, but the knives eventually cut. From the dead, life was found, if only for a little while longer. Baker couldn't take it anymore. Maybe it was the smell, or maybe it was the thought of what we were doing. He vomited up what little bit lingered in his stomach. He wasted no time shoveling it back into his mouth. With monstrous hands and sharp fingernails, I ripped and tore and ate. With each piece of flesh and smear of red, something inside me died. My soul had long since shattered into a million shards, but even now, an overpowering ache resonated from the pit where my heart had once been. Frozen tears stuck to Baker's pale cheeks as he filled his mouth with crimson. I had to turn away. I couldn't look. I also couldn't stop myself. I just couldn't. God forgive me. I'm just so hungry. This excerpt was translated from a journal belonging to a deckhand aboard a schooner believed to be lost between the years 1770 and 1780. Bones belonging to the crew were found below deck, corresponding with the claims made in the journal. The fate of the writer and the man named Baker are unknown. Where did she go? I looked around the crowded sidewalk, but I couldn't see her. She was here a minute ago. "Hey, little boy," said a voice. I turned to see a man in a white business shirt and tan pants. "Are you lost?" "No, I'm looking for my babysitter." "You mean Sarah?" "Yeah, do you know her, mister?" The man smiled. "Sure," he said. "We're old friends. She's worried about you. Come on, I'll take you to her." Something about the man's smile made my skin crawl. But he knows Sarah, so he could be all right, right? I looked around at the shifting crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah's pink shirt or blonde hair. It was useless, though. She was nowhere to be seen. "Are you all right, kid?" asked the man. He was frowning now and checked his watch. "Hey, I'm a little bit in a hurry," he said. "If you don't want my help, you'll have to find her on your own." "No," I said, without thinking. "It's okay. I'll come with you." The man smiled again. "Good idea," he said. We walked through the sidewalk together, the man and I. As we did, I grew more and more uncomfortable. Something about the man bothered me, but I couldn't put it into words. Eventually, the feeling became so strong that I could no longer keep quiet. "Sir?" I asked. "Yes," the man smiled, but it didn't look like he meant it. I could tell his patience was running thin. "What is Sarah's last name?" "What?" "You said you knew my babysitter, Sarah. What's her last name?" The man frowned. "I don't know her last name," he said. "I only just met her today. I told her I would help her find you." Didn't he say that they were good friends? I'm sorry," I said. I need to go." The man started towards me and I bolted. I ran and ran and I didn't stop until I made it home, panting and grabbing at the painful stitch in my side. I saw Sarah's car in the driveway and I ran to the door and rang the bell until she answered. She looked shocked to see me. "Oh, Billy," she said, "you're back." She scooped me up into a hug. "I'm so relieved to see you safe. Don't ever run off like that again, okay?" I was surprised to find myself crying. "I won't," I said. "I promise." I let Sarah take me indoors and make me a mug of warm cocoa to help calm me down. I wrapped myself in a blanket and turned on my favorite cartoons, and before I knew it, I was falling off to sleep. In the other room, I could hear Sarah's muttering on the phone. She sounded upset. "She must be telling your parents. You should go help. It wasn't really her fault." I slid off the couch and made my way to the guest room. I tried the door, but it was locked. Being nosy, I pressed my ear to the wood to listen. "My fault," Sarah was saying. "You're the one who let him run off. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's here at the house now. I put some sleeping pills in his cocoa. Hurry up and come get him before his parents get back." My heart jumped into my throat, and slowly, silently, I backed away from the guest room door. I tiptoed out of the house and ran to my neighbor's house. I banged on their door, hoping desperately that they were home, and that the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital later that day with my parents crying over me. Years later, they told me that Sarah had arranged to have me kidnapped to pay off a gambling debt she had incurred with the wrong people. She was arrested and sentenced to a long time in prison. Based off the description I gave the sketch artist, the man in the tan pants was identified as a member of a human trafficking ring. To this day, he has not been caught. When I was 19, in the early 90s, my brother and his wife were newly married and living in Baltimore. I was from Maryland, but had not yet spent time in that city. I knew it wasn't totally safe in parts, but I also knew that I wasn't just going straight to my brother's and sister-in-law's house, so it would be fine. Until I turned onto the wrong street. This was MLK Boulevard, and back then it was a stretch of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, boarded up houses. A few people were walking in the middle of the street drinking out of paper bags. I knew that I'd messed up, and instead of freaking out and getting more lost, I pulled into an abandoned gas station. There was a bank of payphones, and I parked about 10 feet from them, hopped out, and called my brother. He was impatient at first because he knew the city quite well, but it was my first time driving in it, and I was trying to write down his directions as he gave them to me. Just then, something caught my eye, and I looked over at my car. 3 men were leaning against it, 2 on the passenger side and 1 against the driver's side front door. They were all staring at me with their arms crossed. I started to silently cry, thankful that I had on sunglasses. My brother heard me sniffling and said, "Why are you upset? I'm giving you directions." But I couldn't tell him what was going on as the men were within earshot. I got the rest of the directions, put them in my pocket, and walked to my car. The man leaning against my door reached up and wiped the tears from one cheek and then said, "Why are you crying, baby? Nothing bad has happened yet." Without even thinking about it, I responded, fully sobbing now. "I just shot my boyfriend and I'm in a lot of trouble. The cops are..." That's all I got out. The 3 men had all taken off in separate directions at full sprints away from me. If I hadn't been gifted with that lie from my guardian angels or whomever saved my ass that day, who knows what would have happened. Dudes, I no longer live in Maryland, but let's not meet again. The woman that wanted to sell my organs. So, this was a long time ago. I was around 8 at the time. I was on vacation during the summer in Morocco with my family when this happened. We were visiting family from my father's side who lived there and owned a small shop. An important detail is that I didn't speak the language. I just had some notions. During the afternoons in Morocco, everybody would stop working and go home to take a nap between 1 and 4, or 5 more or less. This is a custom there, and as a kid, I was never sleepy during the day, so I would usually just hang out with my cousin. We are both females. That day, my uncle asked his daughter to keep the shop open, and I decided to stay with her. I wanted to help her, or maybe just wanted to play and pretend I was a cashier. Anyways, during that time of day, things are very calm and quiet because almost everyone is at home sleeping, mostly adults. But this woman arrived. She came into the shop, and I remembered watching her walking towards us because she had a huge bandage on her forehead and was staring at me. She walked up to me, handed me some cash, and started to talk to me. I took the money without understanding anything she was saying because I assumed she wanted to buy something. That's when my cousin came between me and the woman, took the cash out of my hand to give it back to her, and told her to leave. I remember being confused. I didn't understand why she was so aggressive towards that woman. They kept talking for a minute and the woman finally left. When she was gone, my cousin explained to me that the woman was giving me money to follow her to buy me candy. But of course, she really just wanted to separate me from people and put the bandage with the chloroform on my mouth. She would then join other people to trade me for money, and they would have killed me and sell my organs on the black market. So thanks a lot to my cousin who protected me and probably saved my life that day. And to the woman that wanted to kill me and sell my organs, let's not meet. What really attacked our horses? My sister and I took a ride on our horses a few days ago, and I would say our horses are fairly spook-proof. They sit still when we shoot rifles off their backs, so when they got spooked at a tall, dark, twisted figure in the corner of the woods, we flipped out and booked it back to the barn. We rode them straight into the barn, sucking down so that we wouldn't get knocked off. They ran straight into their stalls. My sister was in a separate stall opposite me with her horse. We locked the stalls and bolted the doors shut from the inside. This was a feature I never thought we would need. Deadbolts on the inside of a stall and wood window covers, there was no way inside. I heard it chase us, whatever it was, and had been following us closely through the field. I think we barely escaped. I didn't even notice my horse was bleeding on her left hip. I felt her kick while we were riding away, but I didn't think something had actually got her. She was sweaty, and I could see the white in her eyes. I stood away from the window and the door. My father must have seen us, or it, because we heard gunshots coming from the right side of the barn going towards the field. I called out to Sherry, not her real name, asking if she was okay. She was, but her horse was hurt just like mine. She asked if I saw what it was that scared the horses. I told her I barely saw anything. To be honest, I still don't know what it was, but it was thin and dark and smelled rotten. It left claw marks deep in our horses' backsides. They'll have matching scars, but I don't think they'll let us take them back into the woods. They haven't left their stalls for 2 days. My dad described it as a really mutilated and mangled dog. He shot at it. When it started to run into the barn, he made it bleed, but we haven't found the body. To be fair, he was pretty far away from it, so he didn't see it really good. What is it? I've heard of skinwalkers and wendigos, so I thought I'd post my story and ask. We have no clue to this day, but it always comes back at the end of every month without fail and kills our livestock. It hasn't come this close to us before, but now it's become a scary problem. Any help would be appreciated. I'll update soon. It should be back, and my brothers are going to kill it this time. I was 7 years old and walking to my grandparents' house alone one sunny Sunday afternoon. By the way, this is totally a true story. Anyway, it was 1981, and I wasn't unusual at the time for people to ride in the boxes of pickup trucks. Back then, everything was still closed on Sundays, and as I crossed the parking lot of the local grocery store, a pickup truck cut across in front of me and at the same time hitting a speed bump. There were 2 people sitting in the box of the truck. The dude held on. The girl didn't have a chance. She shot straight up in the air, a good 10 to 15 feet in the air, not 5 feet in front of 7-year-old me. When she hit the ground, I closed my eyes. The thud is forever tattooed on my memory, and when I open my eyes, what stared back at me has given me nightmares for the last 38 years. Her body was in a weird position with one leg at an odd angle, and it was twitching. Her head was cracked in half and literally looked like a cracked open watermelon, except, a girl's head. One eye had popped out of socket, and that's the eye I stare into almost every night of my life since. This one is pretty short. Back in 2008 or 2009 maybe, even 2010, my sisters and I were sleeping in the den on a big blanket on the floor in my grandma's house. Yeah, that's a bit odd, but we did little weird sleepover things like that on Easter. Keep in mind, we were visiting my grandma, and she lived in an entirely different state than my parents. It was just us there from what I remember. I woke up the next morning to both of my sisters saying they saw the Easter bunny looking through our window. I obviously didn't believe them. I didn't really ever think much of it until recently. I asked them, remember when you guys lied about seeing the Easter bunny? They had sworn up and down that they really did see him, which one of them is an adult now, so I thought they were still trolling. I asked them if it was like a costume, because why would there be some fucking Roger Rabbit looking through the window? They said it was. That's when we were all kind of like, oh shit. We confronted my mom, who said no one dressed up as the Easter bunny to watch us sleeping at 2 a.m. on Easter, because what would be the purpose of that? So basically, some weirdo decided to watch a bunch of 3 to 8-year-old girls sleeping on Easter dressed as a bunny. So, Easter bunny, let's not meet again.